So Canada shocked economists again. Our GDP beat expectations, U.S. companies are quietly sneaking across the border, and Mark Carney is aiming for $1 trillion in new investment.
Meanwhile, Donald Trump spent the week closing Venezuela's airspace, threatening members of Congress, shaking down Canada for missile defense money, and still demolishing the White House. All while American allies are quietly tiptoeing away and saying, "We're good, thanks." He's too busy starting fires to notice everyone else has stopped listening.
And out west, Ottawa and Alberta finally signed their MOU, a massive win for Alberta. And somehow Danielle Smith still got booed by her own party. She'd literally brought them a victory that they demanded, and the separatists are still furious. At this point, you gotta ask, do they actually want solutions, or do they just want something to stay angry about?
Welcome to Monday. Canada's economy is shifting under our feet, and this time we're actually doing it on purpose. And stick around, because at some point today, we've got to talk about Wayne Gretzky golfing with Donald Trump. It's as if he's trying to rub it in every Canadian's face at this point.
So today, we're breaking down how Canada's entire economy is quietly shifting from Carney's trillion-dollar investment push to U.S. companies moving north, and Danielle Smith still vowing to fight Ottawa even though she got nearly everything that she wants.
So let's start with the headline that got our blood boiling. Can we talk about that golf photo that's making the rounds?
You know, the one where Wayne Gretzky spends 1 week on TV complaining that Canada doesn't love him anymore, and then the next week, he's grinning on the Florida fairway beside the guy threatening to annex our country.
And honestly, at this point, Wayne Gretzky showing up beside Trump doesn't even shock me anymore. The man's moral compass has always been pointed wherever the money flows. This is someone who got wrapped up in an insider betting scandal, who now fronts half the online gambling ads on TV, and who's never left that old-school locker room hero bubble he built his whole identity around.
Exactly. You know, Wayne Gretzky's been the patron saint of bro culture for 40 years. Of course he's comfortable hanging out with a guy who treats geopolitics like a grudge match and diplomacy like a punchline. To him, it's just another clubhouse photo op.
But come on, a Florida fairway with the man threatening to make us the 51st state? That's not Canada's hero. That's someone who looked at the global danger Trump's causing and said, well, does it come with a tea time?
Which brings us to the question that we want to, as Canadians, ask everyone. Do we revoke Gretzky's Order of Canada, or do we admit that he was never the hero that we wanted him to be?
Because you don't stand beside a man threatening our country unless you are either reckless or you're just not that smart.
Let us know in the comments, because we want to hear what you think.
And the timing really couldn't be worse. While Canadians are dealing with real economic stakes, real sovereignty issues, real security concerns, Gretzky's grinning like he won a raffle.
It tells you everything you need to know, doesn't it? Some of these so-called Canadian icons still wrap themselves in the flag on TV, but the second a billionaire waves a golf club, well, they fold like a cheap lawn chair.
Meanwhile, the rest of us, we're actually fighting for the country we love, not posing with the guy trying to absorb us like a discount condo development. And nothing highlights that more than Mark Carney's $1 trillion investment goal.
That's right, you heard that right. Mark Carney is aiming to become a capital magnet. Clean tech, green steel, EV supply chain, critical minerals, cybersecurity, aerospace, you name it. It could and it should happen.
But economists are saying that the only thing standing in the way of us reaching that $1 trillion investment is Canada's own structural red tape.
Hear that, Ottawa? Carney's ready to sign big deals and get jobs. Just cut the paperwork that was designed during the rotary phone era, will you?
Because here's the truth. Investors go where things work. They want a stable democracy, rule of law, predictable regulations, a force that isn't being sideswiped by government theatrics every 48 hours.
This isn't just abstract economic theory. Companies are actually doing it. They're packing up, crossing the border, and saying, Canada, we'd like to live somewhere that isn't one big political panic attack.
So let's start with my personal favorite, the Siebel Institute, a Chicago brewing school that's been around for 154 years. That's older than Alberta. It's older than industrial beer. and it's now moving to Montreal.
After 154 years. And why? Because Trump's cuts to student visas and his war on academic institutions made it impossible for international students, who are their main customers, to attend classes in the US without living in fear of ICE.
Meanwhile, in Canada, no one is getting randomly rounded up. We let students attend class. I know, it's a wild concept.
And speaking of wild, let's talk about Sourpuss, the bright pink hangover in a bottle. Phillips Distilling is moving production from Minnesota to Montreal because nearly 98% of Sourpuss buyers are Canadian. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but I guess I'll take it. And provincial liquor boards quietly stopped stocking American-made booze during the tariff war and continue to this day.
So you know your foreign policy is a disaster when even Sourpuss is fleeing the country. But the biggest one? Carbon Capture Inc. They were set to build a massive carbon removal facility in Arizona. Then Trump's energy secretary shredded any clean energy incentives that was holding the project together.
So where did the entire operation decide to go? Alberta. Innisfil, to be exact, partnering with Deep Sky.
Alberta, a province that's been begging for diversification for decades, is suddenly attracting high-tech carbon removal because the U.S. is too unstable to do it.
As the CEO of Deep Sky literally said, interest from American companies has increased tremendously in the past year because Canada has a more supportive regulatory and financial environment for innovation.
In other words, if you want chaos, go south. If you want to build something, you come up here to the north.
We're sitting on the second largest resource inheritance on Earth. We're a perfect trade partner for East Asia, and we're finally diversifying.
So when people say Canada is running on fumes, maybe they should look at the companies that are quietly showing up on our doorstep with their luggage packed.
They just want stability, predictability, a government that doesn't treat economic policy like a reality show twist.
And they want boring. Boring is profitable. Boring is bankable. Boring keeps your shareholders from hyperventilating.
Canada is suddenly the country saying, hey, we don't bomb random countries on Thanksgiving weekend, or have a president comparing reporters to pork. And investors go, wow, a grown-up.
Or, as Mark Carney would put it, come for the renewable energy incentives, stay for the functioning democracy.
And speaking of investment, let's talk about the province that just got nearly everything it asked for and still threw a tantrum.
Because only in Alberta politics do you win the Grey Cup and then boo the star quarterback.
Danielle Smith signs a historic pipeline memorandum of understanding that creates a framework where Ottawa says if you find a private company to build this, we promise not to block it with federal red tape.
This is a deal that clears regulatory hurdles, opens up a West Coast route, and literally gives Alberta the victory it's been screaming for since dial-up internet. And what happens when she announces it at her party convention?
Booed by her own members at her own event for delivering the exact thing that they demanded.
Smith has to stand on stage and beg them to take the win. And then the separatist crowd, what did they do? They said, no thanks. We prefer being mad.
They don't want solutions. They only want enemies.
And Smith, she tried everything to keep them happy, promising to double down on fighting Ottawa, refusing to enforce the federal gun buyback program, hinting at blocking prosecutors, even dangling the Sovereignty Act like a chew toy.
So she gave them the red meat. Immigration control, guns, anti-woke lines, ending fluoride, bringing back coal. You name the grievance, she fed it.
And still, boo. Because the real problem isn't what Smith did. It's that she did it with Ottawa.
And nothing sends the Alberta separatist wing into a psychic tailspin like the idea of cooperating with the federal government, even when it benefits Alberta.
And before we move on, we really should talk about the neighbor to Alberta.
Because while Danielle Smith was out declaring victory, BC Premier David Eby was basically standing on the porch like, hi, did you forget the entire province that your pipeline has to travel through?
And let's be honest, Eby is the adult in this whole situation. He's not rage posting or yelling. He's saying respect our coast, respect First Nations, keep the taker ban, and then we can talk.
And he's not wrong, truthfully. Smith's deal with Ottawa floated a possible exemption to the tanker ban on BC's north coast, and that triggered every alarm bell in the province. Coastal First Nations immediately said they'd fight it in court, and EB called lifting the ban a grave mistake.
So he drew a clear, reasonable line. If the tanker ban stays, he's open to discussions. If it goes, well, forget it.
Meanwhile, Alberta is dead set on Prince Rupert, the one place where the tanker ban makes the whole thing impossible. So why? Well, because it's closer to Edmonton, it's less congested than Vancouver, and honestly, the only deep-water port that actually works for Asia's export route.
Except it's also the exact spot covered by the tanker ban.
So Ottawa had to step in and go, well, maybe we could keep the ban and route the pipeline to Vancouver instead.
Which Alberta hates even more because Vancouver's already at capacity and it's already politically fraught. And it comes down to its own wall of environmental assessments and local resistance.
So now we're looking at a pipeline deal where Alberta wants Route A, BC will only accept Route B, and Ottawa is trying to quietly pretend that both can happen at the same time. But you know what? At least they're willing to talk, and I guess that's a start.
Which is why it's so shocking to me that she was booed. Wouldn't you rather start talking than be in a standoff? The paradox is unbelievable. Alberta wins, a huge, tangible regulatory victory, and somehow is still being treated like betrayal.
And that tells you something. This isn't really about policy anymore. It's about emotion, identity, and outrage that's been stoked for so long, people don't know how to function without it.
Which is why we need to zoom out for a second, because what's happening in Alberta isn't isolated. It's part of a bigger, much weirder moment that's happening on both sides of the border.
Yep, in the US, Marjorie Taylor Greene went on national TV recently and tried to take a softer tone. She talked about wanting less anger, less toxicity, more unity. And honestly, if she meant it, that's good. Actually, that would be a relief.
And Danielle Smith, she tried a version of that too. She stood next to Mark Carney, shook his hand, and made it look like she was ready for a more cooperative, more constructive phase of leadership.
And look, maybe both of them genuinely do want to turn the page. People evolve, politics shifts. There's nothing wrong with trying to de-escalate.
But here's the problem, Dave. When you spend years fanning flames, you don't get to be surprised when your base is still on fire.
So true. Rage politics does what it says on the label. It creates rage. It feeds it, it rewards it, and once that machine is running, it does not care if its creator suddenly wants calmer vibes.
So Marjorie Taylor Greene tries to talk about unity, and her supporters, they're not ready to hear it at all. Smith signs a national deal, and her own convention boos her for even mentioning Canada.
And it's not that these leaders can't change, it's that their base doesn't want them to.
They built movements centered on outrage, suspicion, and division. And now that the consequences are landing on their own desks, they're discovering something very uncomfortable.
Once you train people to distrust everything, they start distrusting you too.
And that's the scary part. Not Smith and not Marjorie Taylor Greene. It's what happens when an entire political culture becomes addicted to anger and rage.
Because anger is easy to start and almost impossible to turn off.
So that's where we are, Canada. A country quietly stabilizing while our neighbors implode.
But here's the good news. Canadians are paying attention. They're asking real questions. They're demanding real leadership. And they're choosing something a lot more powerful than rage politics.
Canada's choosing stability, competence, actual grown-up decisions, and compromise. What a wild idea, right?
Yep. And if you want more honest breakdowns like this, minus the spin, minus the nonsense, make sure you hit subscribe, smash the like button, and click the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive coming at you tomorrow.
And if you want to keep this channel up and running and very strong, check out the merch store. We've got our Maple Mega Detector, the Who Cares t-shirts, and my personal favorite, the Cool in Canada sweatshirt.
And don't forget our Substack, Unfiltered North. It's where we post the stuff YouTube would probably side-eye if we actually said it out loud.
All the links are below, so join the community and get the early breakdowns and help us push back with facts, humor, and a little bit of Canadian stubbornness.
So thanks for watching as always, and thanks for caring, and thanks for keeping elbows up while democracy is doing donuts on the highway.